So, what if the exact year of the apocalypse wasn't a mystery at all? Today, we're going to dive into a really detailed prophetic timeline, one that claims to have totally cracked the code. And we're not just talking about the end times, but pinpointing the very start of eternity itself.
It's a question people have been asking for, well, forever. And yeah, most traditions will tell you, hey, no one can know the day or the hour. But the source material we're digging into today, it makes a really bold claim. It says not only can the year be known, but it was specifically meant for us, for our generation to finally get it.
And here it is. This is the year it all supposedly needs to. 2070. According to this whole interpretation, 2070 AD is the kickoff for the 1,000-year reign, the millennium. So the big question is, how on earth did they land on that exact date? Well, stick around because that's exactly what we're about to break down. Okay, so to really get how this timeline works, we've got to start with what the author calls the three foundational keys. Think of them like a decoder ring for this whole prophetic code. They're the basic building blocks for everything that comes next. And each one is a specific unit of time that they've pulled straight from Scripture.
All right, key number one. This is all about the length of a generation. Now, you might think 20, maybe 40 years, right? Nope. Based on a verse in Genesis, the author here defines one single biblical generation as a full 120 years. And trust me, this number becomes absolutely crucial for the first big piece of the puzzle.
Okay, next up, we've got this unit called a prophetic day. Where does that come from? Well, it's an interpretation of that recurring biblical phrase, time, times, and half a time. The author reads that and says, okay, that's 3.5 years. So this 3.5-year block of time, it's going to pop up again and again to measure out all these key events. And the final key, well, this one's probably the most abstract of the three. It's called the prophetic cubit. And you got to follow the logic here, because it's a big interpretive leap. The source looks at a passage in Matthew and argues that a cubit, which, is a unit of distance, can be read symbolically as a unit of time, specifically 1 year. So if you follow that logic, 2,000 cubits can equal 2,000 years. Just tuck that idea away, because it is absolutely essential for what's coming up. Okay, so we've got our three keys, right? The 120-year generation, the 3.5-year prophetic day, and the 1-year cubit. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The author uses these keys to find one single critical anchor date. And what's kind of wild is that they follow two totally different prophetic paths. Starting thousands of years apart, and somehow both calculations land on the exact same year, 2034.
So let's look at pass number one. This one starts with a date we all know, 1914, the beginning of the First World War. In this interpretation, that event marks the start of the last generation that's talked about in the Gospel of Matthew. So you take that first key we learned, a generation is 120 years, you add it to 1914, and boom, you land right on 2034. Okay, now for path number two. This one starts way back with the death of Christ in 34 AD. The author makes a connection here to an old rule for the Israelites, who had to stay 2,000 cubits away from the Ark of the Covenant. Remember that prophetic cubit key, or 1 cubit equals 1 year? Well, 2,000 cubits becomes 2,000 years. You add that to 34 AD, and get this, you land on the very same year again, 2034. It's pretty incredible how they line up. All right, so 2034 is now locked in. It's our anchor date, right? In this theory, that's the end of the Great Tribulation. And from that point, the rest of the timeline can be built out, piece by piece. And it's this construction that's going to lead us all the way to that big number we started with, 2070.
So how exactly do we bridge that gap from 2034 to 2070? Well, the author lays out a very specific sequence. First up, there's a 13-year period of peace. Following that, you get a period of judgment with 7 trumpets. And each one of those trumpets lasts for 1 prophetic day, which, remember, is 3.5 years. And then, right at the very end, there's this little twist, a final 1-year year of grace that gets subtracted. Okay, let's do the math. You take your anchor date, 2034. You add the 13 years of peace, then you add the time for the 7 trumpets, that's 7 times 3.5 years, so 24.5 years, and then you subtract that 1 year of grace. And what do you get? 2070.5. And that, according to this system, is the precise moment the 1,000-year millennium kicks off.
But hold on, the timeline doesn't just stop at 2070, not even close. It actually pushes over 1,000 years into the future. Get this, after the millennium ends in 370, the source says Satan is released, which starts a 120-year rebellion. Once that's finally dealt with, there's a final 49-year Jubilee period. And only after all of that, way out in the year 3240, does what the author calls eternity finally, truly begin.
So that's the whole system, this incredibly detailed chronology from start to finish. But it kind of brings us to one last really crucial question. Why? Why is this knowledge supposedly coming out now, for us? Well, the argument boils down to timing and revelation. The source basically claims that this super detailed understanding was meant to be hidden. It was locked away in previous eras, but it's being revealed in our time for one very simple and kind of chilling reason. We're the ones. We are supposedly the generation that's actually destined to live through it all. So look, whether you buy into this specific calculation or not, you have to admit the system itself is pretty fascinating. It really makes you wonder, right? It poses a much bigger question. What does this whole intricate, code-breaking approach really tell us about our deep human need for certainty, especially when we're facing the unknown? You know, maybe the hunt for a perfect timeline in ancient texts reveals less about the future and a whole lot more about our own desire to find meaning and order in the here and now.